I say? Was that not amazing?
Incredible. So much better than the Slack Hangouts music.
Absolutely. I think I'm going to get it. Instead of it being 30 seconds, I'm going to do a 1 minute countdown just so we can double to that. I don't know if people who hop on the event get to see that or listen to that if they get here early. So anyway,
well, it says we're 45 seconds in, so hopefully.
I hope so, just for them. Otherwise, it's just a special part about being behind the scenes that only guests like you get to experience. So let's get rolling. Usually it takes like a couple minutes for people to actually trickle in. So if you are listening to the words we're saying right now, let us know where you're tuning in from. Hit the comments and just say what city or town you're in. It's always great to see people from different parts of the world, different parts of the country. This is a bit of an international show today because Hugo's based in the UK, if I remember correctly. So speaking of Hugo, we got a great guest, Hugo Lu, CEO, founder of Orchestra. Why don't you give a quick introduction for yourself, Hugo, and then we can pass it over to Satish and I and get started.
Yeah, let's do it. And thanks for having me on. I'm super excited. So I'm Hugo Lu. Anyone who doesn't know me, so I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Orchestra. We're a unified control plane for data operations, and in data speak, what we are is basically data orchestration observability platform. My background is I think this might be like career number 5 or 6, but my first was in investment banking. Okay. Moved to work at Jewel, which I guess US listeners will know and be familiar with.
Yep, all the high schoolers in my neighborhood had one.
Yeah, and this was obviously not a good thing or intentional, but I didn't join in the US part, so I joined in the European part when we were expanding. And classic problem, right? You start expanding into different countries, working with dirty data and loads of different counterparties, and I was in strategy, so I was trying to automate all of this in Excel, and it was a disaster. So said to the data team over in New York, hey guys, can you do this for me? And they said, absolutely not, but we'll show you how. So spent a few weeks in the States trying to learn the basics of SQL, and haven't really looked back since. And now I'm here.
Love it. Happy to have you on. Satish, I don't know if you want to give a quick intro.
Yeah. I am Satish Jayanthi, CTO, co-founder at Coalesce. I'm going to just keep it short, and looking forward to this discussion. Thanks for being on the show, Hugo.
Yeah.
Good.
Same here. Armon Petrossian, CEO, co-founder, Coalesce. It looks like people who do join the call early actually do get to listen to the countdown. Randy Benzel out in Denver said we saw the fancy countdown. So glad to hear it. I will sleep well tonight knowing that. Hugo, so first thing I'm curious about anytime we've got a founder on Coffee with Coalesce is just really around the inspiration for the company.
Yeah.
I think you maybe alluded to it a little bit with your experience at Jewel.
Yeah.
And that probably kicked off your data journey or your career in data. But what was it? Like, what point was it where you were like, screw it, I'm starting a company, I'm going for that?
Well, it was a point that occurred. A point that occurred 4 years too late, unfortunately.
Okay.
Because if you sort of go back to the Jewel days, I remember writing my first script and thinking, right, what have I got to do to get this running? And they said, go talk to this guy. And go talk to this guy. He's like fresh out of college. He's earning 3 times my salary. He's working on this thing called Airflow and Kubernetes. He tells me a bunch of stuff I don't understand. I was just thinking, like, why is it so hard to just run the thing? And obviously I didn't have the answer straight away. And the data space has changed a lot in those last 4 years. But really, I just spending a lot of time trying to stitch different platforms together, orchestrate things, and work out what was going on. And you speak to more data engineers, and that's also the way they're spending their time, right? It's like everyone's going into these Python-based frameworks, spending all of their like a lot of effort, trying to basically build frameworks. Like no one really does data engineering anymore, right? It's like you go back 8 years, everyone was building Salesforce to BigQuery connectors. No one does that anymore. They've been built or you buy them.
Yeah.
And people are spending a lot of time trying to stitch different bits and bobs together. So, I think where I was at in the later role, things just really came to a head where the sort of home hand-rolled system sort of was a breaking point, and that was probably the thing that brought me onto it.
So that makes sense. I mean, it's always seemed orchestration's always seemed too difficult for what you're trying to accomplish as a user. Like, I think you can draw parallels with ingestion and Fivetran, the way they approached it, and it seems like it's become something that's more complex than it needs to be. So you experienced that firsthand, and you had enough conviction to go out and solve that problem. Now, is it as simple as an ease of use play for Orchestra, or is there like what were other areas that you saw when you were working with, say, Airflow, Kubernetes, or other orchestration technologies where you felt like there can be a better solution?
Yeah, it's just such a tough one. I think part of what makes it really interesting for me, right, is that I come into data not from software background.
Okay.
Come from the business side. So we always talk about the problems and the challenges people are facing, right? And often, like everyone will have a similar problem. So take like, stakeholders coming to me being like, "Oh, this data looks funky. Can you check it?" Right? Super annoying, because then you have to go away and context switch and debug stuff. And the issue is that can be for any number of reasons, right? There could be a quality issue that's upstream. You might have really poor orchestration, so maybe something didn't run, and then people can't see the data. It could be user error. It could be so many things. And I think for me, it was just about finding the sort of solution that solved the problem in the right way. And that obviously starts with giving people an easy way to orchestrate, right? It's like, first, like one of the main causes that companies starting out with like an Airflow will have is that it's hard to run that cluster when you start managing more pipelines, and then the cluster doesn't run, and then can you alert yourself? No, because the thing that was going to tell you something failed didn't run.
Right.
So one of the core parts of our platform is the fact that it's managed.
Right.
So we'll solve you the problem if that's the cause, but then there are lots of other different causes that we're also trying to tackle. So yeah, you're right. It's not just triggering and monitoring stuff. There's a lot more built into it.
I figured as much, and that's why I asked, is because I think it's easy for people to come to the conclusion when you think about an orchestration tool that you're just calling different APIs or you're calling different things in a sequence of events. But the way you describe it, that's obviously a component. Reliability is a component in the example you just used. One thing you touched on backstage as well was around some of the other aspects around data governance, for example. And so can you share a little bit more there, as like around how your perspective impacts Orchestra's platform for customers and consumers when it comes to governance and what that really means to you?
Yeah. So I think, I'm not gonna try and define governance right here. But one thing is definitely keeping an eye on like what your data products are, right? I think part of the issue with having all of these new and great tools is that they make stuff really, really easy to do. And there's like this line when people blog about it, it's like, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. And if everyone's in that repo, then at least you can monitor it. But today with the organizations we speak to, there's a lot of complexity, right? It's like there are different tools, there are different systems, there are different stakeholders, there are different teams, there are probably different business divisions, and the question becomes, okay, how do you govern and say, here are the things I really care about? And that is, we're sort of taking that from the top down approach. So we have this concept of like data products. They're basically just collections of pipelines, but the premise is, this is all sort of version controlled. This is the stuff that you really care about. And here's everything that relates to it. So, this is my like CRM data product. It's like our CRM universe, whatever. Here are all the processes that relate to it. Here are the owners. Here's how much it costs. Here's what the quality of the data looks like. So you can monitor that, and then you can also say in Orchestra, right, show me everything else in my org.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on with that? I don't think just like having a central place to see all of this in the first place is really, really helpful, because it unearths all the little things that you thought you had to, monitor and care about, when actually maybe you don't, right? Maybe 700 of your, SQL queries that are running every day they're just things that analysts are doing, and it's okay that they're failing because they're sort of like, experimental. But can you have a place where you see the main things you care about in like a single place? That's sort of what Orchestra's trying to do.
Yeah, in a simplified way as well. I know we have a product marketing data engineer here at Coalesce, Josh Hall. I maybe even interacted with him, but he spoke really highly of the Orchestra platform for that component specifically.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking a little bit about data products, Satish. I know you were curious about something around data mesh as far as Hugo's concerned. What was it that you were curious about?
Yeah, I mean, you briefly touched upon it already. We hear data mesh a lot. A lot of people talk about data mesh, what it is, centralization versus decentralization, data as a product. There's a lot of these concepts.
Yeah.
Although I have, not seen anybody fully like implementing end to end and successfully. That doesn't mean it's not out there. Yeah. My question to you is, have you seen your product being used in that environment, in that architecture or paradigm, whatever you want to call it? And if so,
totally. I think to answer the how question, you've got to think about the things you're trying to achieve, right, with a data mesh and what happens when that goes wrong. So the typical journey is, large company, big data team, 20 people, too many requests, right? Mm-hmm. Like, how do we serve this team? They have all the business logic, but they're not engineers, right? Or maybe they are, but they can't use the tools we're using because we're super smart, right? So we say, okay, we're not gonna do your data request. We're not gonna build your pipeline. We're gonna give you the tools to do it yourself. So this pattern repeats, and then the problem becomes, okay, right? Everyone's doing their own thing, but this is spiraling out of control. Like, we haven't given them enough guardrails, right? Maybe you give them, Snowflake, and they start scheduling tasks and running queries, but it's not done in the right way. Maybe they're trying to build a data product, but you've already got a data product for that. So then you have duplication, and then you have another problem, which is that people are trying to find the data, and they're trying to say, well, should I be using that product or that one? I don't know. No, I can't even make a decision. Yeah. So then you have like two problems. You're spending twice as much money and spend twice as much effort, and no one can even make a decision. So there's sort of this natural tension, right, between putting in guardrails and making things go faster. So our approach to this is to give a single management control plane layer for everyone. So instead of saying, yes, you can orchestrate and trigger things however you want, and if you want to sort of aggregate that metadata so that you can tell people what a data product is, you've got to write all that code and do all that management yourself. We say, as long as you use Orchestra, that will all just fall out. So you can still use, whatever tools you want, right? It's like you want to use a managed suggestion tool, you want to run a Python script in AWS, doesn't matter. But trigger things from Orchestra, monitor things with Orchestra. If it's a data product, do some basic catalog in Orchestra, and then that way you can sort of see how different things are interacting with the mesh without having to also impose this quite strict technical burden, which is uniform on every single team. And I think that's the thing we see, right? So when we see data mesh working really well, it's in huge organizations where, they're so big, every team has that sort of technical resource, but then they still become a sort of local bottleneck, right? That's the sort of thing we're trying to eliminate.
Just so it sounds like a big component of it is the increased visibility, basically. So being able to provide transparency for teams across an enterprise. So they've got one holistic view. I think that's what you call, is it the unified control plane? Basically, you've got one place everybody can go, one platform everybody can go. I mean, it's a little bit of what people say with like the cataloging space, but this is actionable, maybe a little bit more actionable.
I mean, it is similar. And I think one of the big problems that, large enterprises will face is data discoverability, right? It's like, I have a question, I know I need data, what data set do I look at? Catalogs solve this really well, right? We don't solve this problem. But there's a great cost to catalogs because they don't keep themselves updated, right? And this is the part of Orchestra which is a benefit, because it sort of automatically updates because it's built into the orchestration framework, right?
Yeah.
But I think they definitely have their place. Increasingly, right, we get asked to push metadata that we've created to catalogs because that's what people have and that's what they're using for discoverability. Right. So it's really flexible. We can sort of work with something like a catalog or leverage Orchestra for that as well.
Was this similar to what your vision was when you started Orchestra, or was there any changes, adjustments, pivots as you've gone through this journey?
Yeah, there will be, but we're keeping those under wraps for now. But nothing.
What do you mean? You got to share this info.
No, we can't.
Hugo, come on. You're just gonna leave this out for okay.
Ask me.
I'll remember that.
Ask me again in 10 minutes.
Okay.
But I think like high level, right? You have different data sources, right? And you need a way to integrate them. So ideally, you have something that integrates all of them. So you build a really nice ingestion tool, right? And then you realize that you need, something that can handle transformations, because now ELT is super popular, right? So then that's basically another microservice. And then you realize you have all these other different components to your stack that are maybe multi-tenanted. So then you're like, okay, now I need to integrate all these things data teams use. So from my perspective, it's like, well, let's build the platform that is the connective tissue between all of those things. Rather than you have to, manage an Airflow cluster, write loads of code yourself, get an observability tool, buy a lineage tool, buy a data cataloging tool, buy a data quality tool, because they're all doing the same thing, right? They're all just helping you build DAGs, schedule things, gathering metadata, and then presenting it to the user.
Right.
So I think like that's sort of always been the core of what the platform is trying to do. And yeah, definitely some new and interesting bits in the UI. That we didn't envisage in the beginning.
We're ready for you to share right now. As soon as you gather up the confidence, just blurt it out. Just interrupt us, and we can share it with everybody. What about on the founder side? So you started the company. Any lessons you've learned, or anything looking back that you wish you would have done differently, or wish otherwise? Like what's that personal journey been like for you?
I mean, I don't know about how it was for you guys, but I remember one of the first things you said when we spoke was that coming from Worscape, you guys started off doing B2B sales in the enterprise space. And I was like, oh yeah, cool, no dramas, we'll just do the same thing.
Like, who cares about that? Like,
yeah, it's like that'll be fine. Sounds easy. Yeah. By far, like the absolute hardest thing I've ever had to do. And I think the real reckoning moment was sort of, like data engineers are a nightmare to sell to, right? Because we're really picky, we have really high standards, and often like we don't always have loads of budget. Sure. And I was suddenly on the other side of the table, and I was like, oh my God, this is so hard. Like, you're being so difficult. And I was like, Christ, it's me.
Like, that's what I was like back then.
Oh my God, yeah.
What do you think?
That's a bit hard.
Can you share more about that? Because I'm sure. What do you think? So I think some of the feedback I've got from people, and to me, sales is always a really fun part of the job. Like I embrace it, I enjoy it. I also love the technical aspects. And yes, data engineers can be great. They can be a unique audience for sure, but sometimes I hear like they don't want to talk to people. Like they don't want to.
Oh no, they do. Yeah, okay. They totes do.
That's not the problem. So what are like some of the challenges that you've gone through?
It's just like bringing the problem back to data orchestration technology is quite hard.
Okay.
You know, people want to say, right, okay, you've got this problem. You know, it's a real life business problem, right? The classic one for like streaming data is, okay, your plane's on the runway. Like, what's the cost of that plane being on the runway? Okay, okay, so if we can get the data faster so the plane can take off further, you can save yourself 200 million. If we just shave 5 minutes off that flight time, great.
Right.
When you try to bring problems back to like how you're, you know, basically triggering and monitoring stuff, it just can feel like a little bit contrived sometimes. But I think the fact that now the platform is a lot more mature helps with that, because, you know, recently, you know, people see it, right? You show them what they're potentially doing in code and in Python and Airflow, and then you show them how you can build YAML and then just have everything drop out with a lot less effort. And then people are like, oh wow, yeah, now I really see how this can help. But yeah, certainly at the beginning, it's like people want to talk about features, and obviously as an early stage startup, you don't have that many features.
So you found that the conversations would really quickly get too deep in the weeds and prevent people from being able to take a step back and see the big picture and recognize what the actual value was with the platform, or even the potential platform, because you're at probably in the earliest stage of just a vision. You're like, hey, I'm going
to I kind of totally get it, because the data space is really crowded. So as data is like, people in data, like we're really, really sick of people trying to like sell us stuff. Especially like orchestration. You know, it's like there have been a lot of Airflow killers, and you know, like I ran a thought experiment, right? I was like, right, today I'm going to post that Airflow is going to die, and then a couple of weeks later, I was like, no, I'm going to post that, you know, it's not going anywhere. And in the second post, everyone was like, yes, totally agree, like, go Hugo. And then in the first one, everyone was like, you know, who do you think you are? Like, why have you written this? Like, you have no idea what you're talking about. Which I thought was really interesting, if a little stressful.
I was going to ask you about that. You seem to be very popular on social media. You're posting all the time. And then sometimes I think, is Hugo just posting this to get a reaction out of people? Because recently you were like, column lineage isn't even that necessary. And there was like a change my mind. And I saw that, and I instead of liking it, I said, this is funny. Because obviously, you know, for us here, it's been a major differentiator. A lot of people have appreciated about our platform. I was like, Hugo can't possibly think that column lineage isn't necessary for a lot of companies, or maybe you do. But I thought it was I thought it was either maybe a clever way to get people riled up.
Yeah, so, it's an interesting one.
Hugo, were you trolling? Tell me right now.
It's 50-50, Armon. Like, there's always a bit of truth in there. There's always a bit of truth in there, right? It's like, look, on the one hand, like, I know, from speaking to you and Dan and other Coalesces, and also like our own customer feedback, right? People are like, oh, I would love to be able to see the column level lineage. That you also look at how much attention it's garnered, right, over the last 3 years. Like, it's a thing a lot of people are working on, and there's a reason for that. I also just find that, to my point earlier around, okay, like, you have a challenge that you're facing. What do you think the root causes are? Sometimes it can get mixed up and also mean different things. And it's not always, the panacea that, you might think it is. So what's a good example of people getting mixed up? Let's say you want to just, I've got a dashboard or like a machine learning model. And I want to say, okay, that field depends on this field and trace it all the way back, right? Okay, that's one thing. What about if you're deploying changes, right, to transformation model? So I'm saying, right, I'm going to change the name of this column, change the formula, show me what it impacts, right? They're two very different things, right? One of those features is going to look at what's happening and say, here's the state of affairs. The other one is going to say, okay, within your CI/CD pipeline, here's what's going to happen, right? They're two different things, but people would both refer to them in speech as like column level lineage. The other thing that sort of sometimes riles me is people say, well, I can't trace anything back. I need column level lineage to work out what's going on. And then, I'll say, well, how are your pipelines running? And they say, well, everything's sort of running on disparate schedules and they're not interlinked. Yeah. So obviously, if you connected those together, you would be able to see what impacted what, and you would also catch the error earlier, and you would be able to inform your stakeholders in real time that you were on it, and then you'd be able to manually recover stuff instead of spending loads of time manually rerunning schedules like a week too late, and then you wouldn't need column level lineage. So I think that's where I was going with that one.
Yeah. I have a question. You talked about the objections that you usually get when you go and try to position your product. Mm-hmm. Things like, first of all, you said it's a crowded space. We all know that the data space, especially the scheduling. Do you see where in places where they're trying to get a handle on transformations before they talk about orchestration? Is that a prerequisite for people? Okay, we're going to schedule things, but we don't have a handle on kind of transforming the data, preparing it, and all of that. Do you see that?
So is that like a roadblock almost? Is that
a exactly.
Mm-hmm. As in, the question is, do you find people have to have a framework for transforming data before they worry about really, it really depends, right? We'll speak to shops that are maybe not necessarily using an automated transformation framework, right? So just using like a scheduler and store procedures.
Sure.
And in that case, having a single place to view and manage things makes a lot of sense.
For sure.
You speak to a company that is building stuff from scratch, right? We're doing a big migration.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense to have one but not the other when you're starting afresh and you're working with consultants and they're saying, here's what best in class is. Like, obviously not. You have to have something triggering things, otherwise nothing's going to run. But generally, I think there's a bit of truth to it in that, like, the natural arc of a scaling data team is to start with a few pipelines, right? And maybe like, a bit of transformation in your T layer. And then that T layer gets a bit more complicated. And then maybe then you have multiple teams coming after that. And then people say, right, I've got so much going on here. I need visibility into different teams, different data stacks, different pipelines. Let's talk to Hugo.
Yeah.
But I don't think they're like necessary, because there are these scenarios where, one comes before the other or they happen at the same time. But
what's your sweet spot, would you say? Is it when they go from that example of, couple pipelines production, now we're scaling out to new teams, so it's starting to get distributed a bit, and that's where you lose the visibility that you solve? Is that kind of the right time for Orchestra, would you say?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I think so. But it's really interesting, because one of the purposes of what we were trying to do was to give people a way to orchestrate and monitor things that's really, really easy. So why wouldn't you have that if you were small?
Yeah, sure.
So
it
so totes works,
right? And it's easy to use. Like, you can totally justify making that simplified.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, like, in the beginning, when we were speaking to companies, we were saying, how can we make your orchestration easier? And if they weren't of a certain scale, they would say, I don't need you to. I have 10 pipelines. They're really easy for me to manage. Thanks, but no thanks.
Sure.
Now we speak to, sort of like a large manufacturer that maybe has 2 teams. They've got, hundreds, dozens of data pipelines, like thousands of queries going on in jobs. That requires, like, quite a lot of knitting together. But as we're sort of developing how we can push queries to things like Snowflake, Databricks, and whatnot, and today we also announced, we haven't announced it, but we support Python, which is an insight, I guess, into what you said before. What are we doing? Oh, look,
you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen.
We're starting a compute engine. Yeah. But that's helpful for small teams, right? It's like, I don't want to maintain this box. I just want to have an easy way to deploy this Python code.
Yep.
Can I do that in a DAG? Yes, here you go. It's Orchestra. So yeah, the sweet spot is changing. Depends on the problem.
So that's cool. So you mentioned you came from the business, not necessarily software engineering or even data. You almost stumbled upon it. When you think about your inspirations as a business person, like is there any executives, founders, CEOs that you really admire or that you think of when you think of like, I want to continue down this journey, and you like?
Yeah, that's a good one. You mean specifically to the business?
It doesn't necessarily even be in the data space. Like, I'll give you an example.
Yeah. What about you? Who are your idols?
Like I think what Satya Nadella has done at Microsoft is insanely impressive. I think he inherited the company in a weak position and made some really massive bets, and they paid off so incredibly well. And so, that's a good example. I think a recent one would be like NVIDIA, Jensen at NVIDIA, a super impressive individual, like kind of just stuck with it for so long and then hit this parabolic growth curve. And you got to admire somebody who's been at that for such a long period of time. So yeah, I mean, just execs in general, is there anybody that comes to mind for you, or any biographies you've read or anything in particular?
Yeah, I mean, the latest biography I read was actually Julia Fox one. And I think in terms of her business decisions, she invested in a club, which didn't go so well. So it's good biography, but probably not my business idol. I know. I actually think the way Ali at Databricks has built the company is incredibly impressive.
It's true. Yeah.
I think there's also something about the the sort of approach, right, of building the technology in a right way of Spark that was also slightly, a bit organic, which I also admire, right? It wasn't like they were like, okay, open source is so hot right now. What can we do to acquire, loads and loads of customers in 4 years by selling something for free, and then, really start making money. It was just more like, right, we've got this problem. We need to do something that's better than to do. Let's go do that. And then, now that they're scaling, seeing how much they've sort of leaned into being, just like a little bit of a commercial machine.
It's impressive.
It's astonishing.
I agree. I mean, you have to respect it. Like it's, we've obviously always been focused on the Snowflake ecosystem, but peripherally you see the growth that Databricks has experienced. And I share a similar sentiment because, Snowflake's gone through numerous CEOs, whereas Ali, obviously, he transcended being an academic into being a business leader, which that usually doesn't happen. You don't usually see somebody go from being such a highly technical academic person translate into the business world so successfully. And they're very different types of smart. And I think if you can combine the two and still be incredibly successful, that's a pretty tough job. That's a pretty tough job. And that's a tall order. So that's cool.
Would be cool. Bit of a controversial one, but I think the Palantir CEO is also a bit of a boss, because he's obviously a huge pariah. Alex Karp.
What was the company name? I didn't hear it.
Palantir.
Palantir. Got it. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's fair. They've been having a great run. I mean,
granted, the sort of conception story is not really something that is easy to replicate.
For sure.
But if you look at what they're doing, it's like, who do you sell software to? We sell it to basically the hardest people we could possibly sell to, like FBI or like the NHS,
the government,
right? Yeah, it's like huge like value created. And just on the side, they also happen to have, a complete end-to-end data platform product, which no one seems to talk about, but everybody I do speak to that uses it says it's absolutely incredible. And that's not even in the spotlight. So, I think if you can't sort of aspire and recognize that, if you're in the data space, you're sort of missing a trick, because, it's like our aspiration is his sidekick. So
Yeah, that's cool. Those are great call outs. So shifting gears and looking towards the future. And by the way, if anybody has any questions for Hugo while you're on, just hit the comments and feel free to ask. But as you look through the end of the year and you're thinking about 2025, we always do a prediction. So we do like our top predictions for 2025. I was in Australia a couple of weeks ago, and one of the people who participated in last year's predictions for 2024 referenced it and was like, hey, like a lot of these actually came true. This is pretty impressive. So we'll crowdsource from other founders and thought leaders. And I'm curious for you, like, what do you think is going to be relevant in 2025 that maybe wasn't relevant this year, or what changes will there be?
What changes? I think the overarching thing I'm going to see is just a lot of people being a little bit more honest with themselves.
That'd be great in all aspects.
In all aspects of life. No, look, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? And arguing about different Python frameworks for data ingestion, I think sort of pales into insignificance when you look at everything that's going on in the world. So yeah, like more caution, more pragmatism. How will this manifest itself? I think just people are just going to be a lot more critical about the problems they're trying to solve, right? So a good case in point would be AI, right? I think people will pretty swiftly be like, well, look, if we're actually going to take this seriously, let's think about what we're going to use it for. Okay, like if we're going to use it for that, then well, let's hire 3 software engineers to do it. They can just go off and do it. It's like, do we need this huge fancy data stack to enable AI for this sort of hammer looking for a nail type thing? Like, obviously not. Like, let's sort of reallocate those resources and work out what's going to go down. So yeah, simplification, caution, people sort of working on other things getting turned off.
Do you think the AI related stuff is going to be more talked about or less talked about based on what you're saying? Or is it going to be?
I think more, but not in data.
I see.
I think people are going to be building products that do AI for like use cases outside of data, right? So I spoke to a dude the other day. He works in government. They were, his use case was just had, the ministry that they were working for, they were just manually filling out all these forms because it was completely and now they're building a software product to like ingest all of that data, structure it, and then fill out the forms automatically, just suddenly helping loads and loads and loads of people just stop doing really, really boring admin, right? It's like great use case, love that. Got nothing to do with the data space.
Another example of that I just recently heard, fighting insurance companies. When companies deny claims, it's really hard for a normal person who doesn't understand how to fight that. So somebody built this AI application where you take what insurance has denied and then you kind of give that info and it will collect all the data and put the case forward. And it's just a nightmare for insurance companies.
It's kind of sad that we need that to get our claims, but but going through that experience, I can understand why that exists for sure. I think there's a lot of practical use cases for it. Have you, Hugo, gone through exercises trying to implement AI with Orchestra and kind of come to a conclusion where you were like,
well, what about you? You guys,
you're our guest. Come on, bleached your hair for
obviously. We actually built an AI product. So we were thinking, okay, like make orchestration easy, cool. Yeah. What are people actually trying to do? Like, they're trying to get these data sets to, fulfill this need. So we said, well, why don't we just use AI to do one of those all in the platform? So problem I was facing at the time was people listening, I write a blog on data and I write a lot of articles. And I want to know how well those articles are performing. So I was like, right, I'm going to use AI to scrape data from the internet, tell me how the article's doing, and give me some suggestions on how I can improve it. And then, we used Orchestra to orchestrate that ingestion, transform it, and then we put it in a dashboard in the product. So you could be like, okay, this article's got worse recently. I need to mention, Coalesce more because people are Googling it. And, obviously nobody wanted it. But it was like a hackathon.
So you gave it, you've experimented a bit.
We gave it a shot.
We've gone through similar experiences. We will be rolling out some Gen AI functionality pretty soon here.
Yeah. Tell me my boy SQL query is going to take 7 hours.
A little spoiler alert.
That's exciting. Is it going to stop me writing bad SQL?
That's not necessarily the focus. I think that's nothing's going to stop you from writing bad SQL.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it going to tell my manager?
we're not gonna get in the way of that.
Got to drive that consumption somehow.
Maybe for our customers, we'll stop them from writing bad SQL, but we will not stop you.
Or you could do the opposite. Like, have you considered a union all?
Hugo, it's awesome having you on. How can people find you if they want to contact you and they want to look at Orchestra?
Yeah, for sure. So Orchestra is goorchestra.io. We've got a free tier, which should be evident in terms of how you can find it on the website. With that, you can basically get up and running, run a few data pipelines, and get visibility everywhere. For me, I am on LinkedIn, so find me there. We have a Substack as well, and most of my writing is on Medium. So I guess I'll comment those links on this somewhere.
Awesome. Hugo is worth a follow for anybody that's tuning in. Definitely add him on LinkedIn. He always knows how to get a reaction out of people, for better or for worse, but I love it. So thanks for being on here, Hugo.
No, thanks for having me, guys.
It was an awesome conversation, and I wish you all the best luck and success with Orchestra.
I appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
Cool. Good stuff, guys.
Yeah.